Welcome, and thank you for joining us to celebrate National Healthcare Decision Day. This day exists to inspire, educate, and empower the public and healthcare providers about the importance of advanced care planning. National Healthcare Decision Day was founded in 2009 with the goal to make available simple, free, and uniform tools to guide the process of healthcare decisions. It is not just about the forms, but also about the conversation and the process involved in making these decisions. In honor of National Healthcare Decision Day, Comfort Care Coalition is presenting a documentary that tells the story of what this day was founded for. Michael Bernhagen, who was a healthcare business development professional who turned hospice advocate, and Terry Kaldhusdal, an award-winning public school teacher and filmmaker, decided to join forces in 2009 to produce a series of documents that have inspired thousands of conversations about end-of-life wishes. Today, we will be showing one of those documentaries, Consider the Conversation. It is a documentary on a taboo subject. We hope that this will inspire you and your family to start having conversation about healthcare decisions that you would want or would not want at the end of life, or even if there's a serious illness. If you would like more information on advanced care planning and tips on ways to begin conversation, you can visit the Conversation Project online. They have many great resources on not just helping you make the decision, but also helping you to start conversations. Also, you can download state model forms such as the advance directive to complete to ensure your wishes are carried out once you have discussed those. And you can do this at tennessee.gov, or you can visit endoflifecaretn.org. There will be a chat box at the bottom of your screen. Should you have any questions during or after the presentation, please just type them into the chat box. We'll take a few minutes at the end of the presentation, and some questions, maybe even during the presentation, we'll answer. Or you can even email questions to Comfort Care Coalition. Our president, Kevin Jones, will post these email addresses in the chat box to make it easier for you. And if you would like more information on the coalition, you can also email us for any information you would like. Again, thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoy the presentation.
Slipped on some ice on the patio. My hip was repaired and was ready to go. Blood caused a stroke, now my body is broke and I can't live alone anymore.
Hopefully, if I'm old and coming to the end of my life, perhaps I would like to be at home, in my own home, or my home of, if I have children, them, or home of a loved one, my husband or sister or whatnot.
I don't want to be in a hospital or a nursing home because it does not have the avocations of one's family life, where one's happiness was always the most profound.
I wouldn't want to be around much training center. Been working so hard with the therapist. Eating is difficult, I make a mess. My right side don't work now, I look like a jerk, and I can't live home anymore.
I'd like to be home and probably in my lover's arms. I would like to be in a really quiet place.
There's not a lot of stress like in a hospital, not a lot of machines, not a lot of noise, just sort of like you can be surrounded by your loved ones whenever you want to be, and it's beautiful.
I love my daughter to sing to me. She sang to her two grandmothers as they passed.
To have a quiet, peaceful spiritual departure, to not be afraid?
I would go, hopefully, not in pain, and at home.
That's a good question. I'd like to be at home with family. Yes. Home with family.
I want to sleep in my bed one more time and bid my life farewell.
Given the choice, most of us would prefer to die in the same place we live, our home, the place our most cherished memories were created. But few of us will have that opportunity.
Well, the history of dying, I can condense the first several thousand years. We know that people died very young out of lack of proper nutrition, out of attacks by animals, out of just the fact that they didn't know how to prolong life, and life was often very difficult and ended probably in the 20s.
At the turn of the century, the 1900s, half of the children under 12 died, and the life expectancy was 48. So everyone knew death.
It was present, it was in the family, and had the extended family already gathered, and so it was just natural that that was a part of, it was interwoven into life.
And when someone got sick, the women in the family and the women neighbors came and cared for them. When a person stopped eating, they knew they were dying, and the family mobilized and kept vigil.
It's a different deal now because not only is it more rare that we have to experience death, we've got such wonderful medical technology that we're shielded in a lot of ways that way, but we're also scattered. We have families that aren't necessarily next door or around the corner in the same house anymore, and so it's a little more awkward to have to pick up the phone to the daughter in California and talk about these things.
But something that we don't consider is that people who live into their 80s and 90s, which is quite common these days, don't always live healthy and vigorous lives.
Most people now die in a hospital. It's not witnessed. Many family members never even come and do a visitation or at the bedside of someone who's dying. So we have removed it. I may say, hey, everyone ought to witness a death. No, I'm not saying that. But it should become much more of a normal way. We hear of the Irish and awake, how normal part of the process that is. Yet here in our culture still, we tend to protect the kids. No, you don't need to go and see your grandma. As opposed to saying, hey, this is a normal part of life. And you know what? Grandma looked pretty normal even when she was dead, when she was alive. So I think normalizing some of this, encouraging the normality, that's something we need to do and change the culture. Again, it's a radical cultural shift, and it's just going to take time chipping away.
We finally got to a point where there was difficulty between he and I, because he did not want to tell Mother that she was dying.
I would make rounds with surgeons and I'd say, when are you going to tell the patient about their diagnosis? And they would put it off and put it off and put it off until the day before the patient went home.
Because I was interviewing a woman who had gone in that day to see her mother, and she'd given her hand to squeeze hello, and her hand had been cold, and it was like this chilly premonition of death, and she drew back. Well, so here's what happened. Her mom had reinforced for her that she was dying, right? She felt shame about that. She felt repulsive about that. The distance between her and her daughter was increased. And the daughter felt discomfort and some embarrassment and some uncertainty about how to behave. Well, sorry, folks, what do you do for any human being who has cold extremities? You warm them up. You put a blanket on top of them. You rub their hand between it. You say, God, your hand is cold. Let's get you comfortable, right? If we can stop being just a little bit not so scared,
and say, what does this person want? I had an elderly Indian patient years ago who was dying of colon cancer, and his family absolutely insisted to me that we not tell old dad what he had.
Or that if we do talk about it, we're going to somehow jinx, the powers in the heavens, and we're going to bring it about sooner.
Does talking about death and dying make it happen sooner? No.
First of all, it shouldn't be at the end of life. It should be throughout life. Waiting until the end of life it's not productive. It causes train wrecks. People don't want to hear it.
I think this is a failure for sure, but it's a failure on the part of our medical system to adequately bestow upon the practitioners the right tools to cope with this last chapter in a way that will allow for something good to happen here, some spiritual growth, some issues that have been undiscussed for a long time, some admissions on the part of the patient and the remaining family members about things that may have been bothering them.
Oh, I'm looking at those cracked lips. Oh, that looks so painful. I don't even know if I should mention it. No, do you want some water? Do you want some ice cubes? Can I get some glycerin? What can I do for your cracked lips? And I say this like it's so easy, but I will tell you that when I was interviewing people who were dying, it took me a long time to get so I could say, you've got a tube coming out of the back of your head draining a bag. What is going on? And you ask them that question, they go, well, I'm glad you asked. And let me tell you about the tube coming out of the back of my head. Well, it took me a long time to get to that point.
If it's a chapter, you can write it, you can work with it. If it's a final moment to be feared at all costs, we spend all that time in horrible fear, and then we grieve terribly when it happens, instead of finding an opportunity.
It's so new. No humans in human history have ever had to face these decisions in the past. So we haven't seen our parents and grandparents have these conversations. We don't know what they look like. And so we avoid them to avoid looking stupid or looking incompetent or looking silly. But I think there's even a deeper reason, which is that having these conversations require us to be pretty intimate. When you start talking about what's most important in your life, you're talking about your ultimate values, about your identity. And you may start to say things that make you really vulnerable, make you really exposed to someone's sharp criticism, or maybe they'll make a joke about it. And I actually think that having these conversations about future healthcare is much more like talking about your sexuality than it is about anything else. It's extremely intimate. You can't be superficial here. Well, you can, but if you do, it doesn't help much. I mean, you don't make really good plans then. So when you're really having, I think, helpful, important conversations about what's important to you in the future, you're really saying to the people you're talking with, this is what's really important to me. This is what gives my life meaning. At this point, when my illness would be so severe, doing more things to me wouldn't be important to me. It might bring up religious beliefs about the afterlife. It will really get into some very profound things about who you are and what you value and how you see your relationships. And we're not all comfortable doing that, even with the people we're closest to.
Throughout your whole life, you always know what's next. When you're growing up, before you go to school, everybody's telling you, oh, you're going to go to grammar school, you're going to love it. You go to grammar school, you're going to read and write. And then people are saying, oh, you're going to go to junior high school, you're going to be a teenager, and it's going to be great, you're kind of scared. You go and you find it's not so bad. And then you get really excited about what's next after that, because then it's high school. And you're going to get your license, and drive a car, get a girlfriend, play sports. And then after that, what's next? Well, what's next is in colleges after that. And you got 4 years of college. And gee, what are you going to do there? You know, it's a whole brand new world. But you always know what's next because you can see everybody that's ahead of you. You can see the people that have been doing this before you, all their brothers and sisters, you know, neighbors that have gone, that are in college. And you're saying, wow, that's really cool, you know. But then you get a job, you know, of course you find a girl, you get married, you start having kids because the majority of people are having kids. You can see what they're doing. But you know what's next because you can see what's happening next. It's right in front of your face. And so there can, even if you don't get it, you can always see what's next. So then suddenly someone tells you, well, you have terminal cancer. And well, what's next after that? Well, there is a what's next after that. They put you through chemotherapy. They make you do all these tests. They, you know, inject you full of drugs. There is a what's next, but it's not a guaranteed what's next. Not nearly as guaranteed as any of the other things you've done. And suddenly none of those things are working. And then you're sitting by yourself in a what's next chair, and you're saying, well, I don't know what's next now. I have no idea what's going to happen to me. If what's next ends tomorrow, where am I going to be?
I absolutely think that hope is out there for anybody and everybody. And there are so many times when people were asking me, do you think there's any hope for me? Maybe 80, 90 years old. And they're still full of life and still full of hope. And their families were just as excited about trying to, you know, get them through this ailment or this terminal illness as it would be for me. And it's the same way with a child. I mean, we always think of, well, it's just a child. So it's more important. It's the hope is more important. They're younger. They haven't lived life. But I'm here to tell you, we all live life and we all have hope in different amounts. But I see it all the time, any age, that people have hope.
That phrase, hope is not a plan, is one that I freely borrowed from a newscaster when he was talking about the disaster in Hurricane Katrina. And as people saw the hurricane coming, they kept hoping that it might go another direction, or hoping that the levees wouldn't break, or hoping that everybody would get out. But nobody was planning for what happens if it really does hit and if the worst happens.
It's a trying time for people in these communities. We know that many are anxious to return to their homes. It's not possible at this moment. Right now, our priority is on saving lives.
We tend to react that way around everything regarding end of life. That we hope they'll get better. We'll hope that this treatment will work, and the doctors oftentimes help us in our hoping and really aren't prodding us to think about, we have this option, but if this one isn't going to come out the way that we're hoping, what are some other options? Where else could we go? what is it that we'd like to accomplish, and how else might we get there? And so if the doctors aren't helping us, we're kind of left alone with just hope and with no plans. And people are then left with having to scramble and deal with a lot of bad options.
People think that hospice is giving up hope, and it's not. It's not giving up hope. I lay out the continuum of hope. We always keep a spirit of hope. The facet of it changes. We find we have a tumor, our first hope is, I hope it's benign. We have it biopsied and the doctor says it's not benign, it's malignant, the hope changes. Well, I hope there's effective treatment for this. You go through the treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, the doctor comes back and says, not being effective any longer, this treatment, it's not. The patient's hope changes and hoping then for more time. Sometimes for two reasons. They hope for more time because new treatments, new research, new drugs come on the market every day, or they begin to hope for more time because they want to make it to a holiday, they want to make it to a wedding, the birth of a grandchild, graduation, some specific event. Then when time seems to be running out and the patient is less responsive, bedbound, eating less, is weaker, needs more help, the patient's hope sometimes at that point changes in hoping for a peaceful ending.
The common misperception of some health professionals is that talking with patients is all about limiting treatment and not doing anything. So the fear is that planning is about do not resuscitate, and planning is about not going back to the hospital and so forth. Now those might be the decisions you ultimately get to. But planning really is not about making a specific medical decision. Planning is about asking the patient, how can I care for you well at this point in your life? And defining what good care means. What does it mean for you to live well? And how can medical care be used to serve that? So when you ask patients the right questions, and you really are getting at the right issues, doing planning about advanced future medical decisions is neither depressing nor does it take away hope from people. One of the patients we talked to said, how can we help you live well? This woman had advanced cancer. So when we asked her, what would it mean for you to live well at this point in your life? She said, spend as much time with my family as possible. And we said, okay, now concretely, what would that mean? And she started to think about that. And she said, why am I coming in for these blood studies every week? And we said, well, why is that an issue? And she said, well, I live 60 miles from here. So coming in for blood study means I get up in the morning, I kind of take a shower, get dressed up, get in the car, drive 60 miles, park, the whole routine. Well, basically, she was spending one day a week just to do this. And she says, I think I'm going to stop this. Now, she wasn't stopping medical care, but she was stopping doing one part of medical care, which was elective, not needed, because she realized that this wasn't actually achieving what was most important in her life at that point, and probably for the rest of it. Some people say, well, why am I going to go through another round of treatment? I know it's only going to be temporary. I'm going to go through a lot of suffering. What else could I do though? Well, let's talk about hospice. And so when you focus planning on helping the patient achieve their goals of care, even if the goals are less treatment, involve less treatment, the goal is also to do something else, spend more time with my family, for example. So it's never taking away hope from anyone. There are ways to have these conversations, which are actually very positive and very seldom take away hope from anyone.
one of my favorite stories, and this happened to me a long time ago, was in 1972. It involved a gentleman, an old gentleman. He had at one time been a vaudeville magician, and his name was Jack, and he was dying in a hospital. His wife, Leona, came to me quite distraught because she had just been told that Jack had 24 hours or less. And what was additionally distressing was he was hallucinating, didn't recognize Leona. Leona wanted to have some quality time. She asked if I might go visit him, but she forewarned me to expect almost anything because of those hallucinations. And I went to the hospital, walked into Jack's room. He was propped up in the bed with some pillows. And as soon as I entered the room, he addressed me by name. They said, "Doug, we have been waiting for you." And as far as I could see, there wasn't any we in the room, but I decided to go along with Jack, whatever he was experiencing. And then he said, "Doug, we're going to initiate you into the International Brotherhood of Magicians." And then after he said that, he went through this series of nonsensical words, and I was Rosta, Magna, kind of reminded of sort of a magical incantation. He ended that chain of words. He said, "Doug, come closer." I walked up to the side of his bed. He said, "Closer, Doug. You must be closer." And I leaned over. And he said, "I'm going to teach you a trick. And this is the greatest trick of all. But you must be closer." I was already this far apart for Jack, and I was uncomfortable at that distance, but I leaned in a little further. We were almost nose to nose. And he had that look that sometimes people could have as if they're looking through your eyes, and he was looking through my eyes until he knew he had my undivided attention. And then he whispered, he said, "Doug, watch me disappear." And Jack died. And I get shivers just recalling that moment, even though it was so many years ago, but the importance of that moment for me was, what if I had, upon initially entering the room, challenged Jack? "Jack, there's no beat here. You need to talk sense." Or if I would have said, "Jack, this is not a time for magic. You're dying, and we need to talk about that." If I would have done either of those things, I would have ruined something that was obviously very meaningful for Jack. I cannot imagine a better death of a magician than the death that Jack chose to die. But it was his unique death, his unique way of communicating, being on stage and communicating to me that both life and death is kind of a magic. It is magical. Both of them are very magical. And he was doing it in a way that I will not, cannot forget. And I just stood there trying to absorb the event, and then a worry started to crop up. And the worry was, how's Leona going to feel? She wasn't here for this. So I went back to Leona with a fair amount of fear, and I told her what happened. And Leona's response was, "Oh, Doug, I'm so glad he did that with you. I know his tricks way ahead of time. It wouldn't have worked with me." And she said, "I know he would have wanted to die in such a way." And everybody kind of, it's their moment. It's their moment on stage to communicate their unique way of going. And it can sometimes be something elaborate like this magic trick. It can sometimes be just looking directly into the eyes of the person I love the most, or holding a hand, or just smiling.
We would come by every afternoon, sometimes to talk to my father-in-law, my daughter's grandfather. Uh, Sometimes we'd just be sitting in the living room as the Dutch will, drinking their coffee, and every day, starting about 5 o'clock, the family doctor was there. He would first go up and talk to Jan, my father-in-law. Then after a while, he'd come down, he'd have a cup of coffee, he'd talk, especially to his wife, but to all the children, there were 4 children, and about what was going to happen and how everybody felt about it. He was doing work. And I sometimes would catch him in the hallway calling his wife saying, "Don't hold dinner for me." And at one point, I was so moved by the way this guy handled it, this family doctor. I said, "Hey, how can, you spend so much time with the family?" And he looked at me like, he said, "I'm a family doctor." He says, "This is a bigger event for the family than it is for Jan. He's made his peace with it, but the rest of the family is the one that needs my care." I wept. That's a kind of doctoring that I don't think we have time for here.
There is so much we can do for people at the end of life. For a physician to say there is nothing else I can do is really, I think, a neglect of their physician duties. I can provide pain relief. I can make sure you're comfortable. I will walk this journey with you to the very end. And I'll even be there for your wife and family afterwards. They're important things that we need to do as physicians, as healthcare systems.
Very early in my hospice career, I walked into the room of a hospice patient to check on her, and she looked lovely. She was very thin, she was dying, but she was peaceful, and she was calm, and she was pain-free, and it looked like you could wrap a big red bow around her. The aide had just been there. She looked wonderful. And then in stark contrast, in the bed next to her was a woman the same age, about 90, who was very uncomfortable. She was gripping the side rails of her bed. She had a feeding tube that had been recently inserted. She had had a stroke, so she could not speak. Her eyes were like saucers, and she pleaded with her eyes, "Help me, help me." So this is the days before HIPAA. I went out to the nurse's station and said, "Does this family know that hospice is available for their loved one?" And the nurse just shook her head and said, "The doctor's never going to go for that."
We're doing chest compressions on a 98-year-old with end stage something who just happens not to have a do not resuscitate status. You can hear their ribs cracking. It's awful. You feel horrible, and you sit there and go, "I was trying to help people, and I am clearly not helping here."
I think it's past time for American society to look itself in the face and say we are simply not meeting our most basic obligations to the least, the last, and the lost among us.
And I was so struck that here was a choice. And I wondered if that woman could sit up in bed for 15 minutes and give her family a piece of her mind, what would she say? Imagine knowing your loved one, how they lived their life, what their values were, what their beliefs were. What would they say to you if you maintained them in this state?
So people are scared. They're scared of suffering. They're scared of being a burden to their families. They're scared of being undignified. They're scared of losing control. And I have to say, all of those fears have some basis in reality. We're all at risk for having that happen. And we're particularly at risk in a culture and in a health system social system that focuses on disease rather than the people living with, disease and frailties of old age.
Many times, we have patients, especially with cancer diagnoses coming in, getting that, with obvious metastatic disease and obviously decreasing functional status. They're losing weight, they're dying, not ever having been told that they're dying.
Physicians are raised up in a system that doesn't give them the tools to adequately deal with this part of life, which I call the last chapter.
I would say that it really falls upon the attending physicians, the senior physicians, the primary physician for that patient to have that conversation. And a lot of times they'll leave that for all the reasons we talked about until it's too late, or maybe they want hospice to do it down the road sometime when I consult them later.
And that's a hard conversation to have. It's one of the more difficult ones to have, because it's as though whoever's seeing them has been misleading them, isn't giving them both sides of the story. They're only giving them the how your cancer's doing side of the story, not your cancer's doing this and you're not doing well. You should get things in order. I mean, that's part of our responsibility, isn't it?
There are islands of excellence in this country where the people who are dying slowly and who are living all the way to the end are getting excellent care. And they're getting more time and they're getting better time with what they have left. And then there are places that are somewhere around 1954. Barely at the point where they want to give the patient a full cancer diagnosis. And some we can be forgiving of that it takes time to evolve. And some it is utterly unacceptable. Yes, we've increased life expectancy. We have technology, and I think there's a real feeling of US physicians that if I have a hammer, I've got to use it regardless of what the nail is.
But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to the patient and the family and healthcare provider. They have to come together to really look at the individual patient, their unique, the patient's unique circumstance and the family preferences, and they come to the decision about what's really the right kind of care for that patient and the family as a whole.
The fact that at both poles of life, as we are born and as we die, we'll be physically dependent on others. And I think that's important for us to recognize, because it's very interesting that, we don't consider the absolute physical dependence and vulnerability and even incontinence of infants and toddlers as being anything abnormal or undignified. And yet at the end of life, we're supposedly undignified because we're physically dependent on others and even incontinent. And I'm sorry, but I think we're just connected. I think that at both poles of human life, caring for one another is what we do. And that is in fact part of our very humanity. It is hardwired within us. So frankly, being physically dependent on others at the end of life doesn't make one undignified. It simply makes one human. I think that's another cultural shift that our culture needs to incorporate as we grow the rest of the way up.
We need to integrate these things into healthcare and make sure that we're not actually saying there's nothing can be done. Having said that, I once looked after a man, a physician, who was a radiologist who was dying of head and neck cancer. And I met his wife some 2 years later, and she said the day the doctor told me there was nothing they could do was just terrible. And I wanted to put up my hand and say, but that's not what I said. I talked about all the wonderful things we could do, keep him comfortable, make sure that we walk the journey. There's hospice involved. She still heard there's nothing we can do. So we can sugarcoat it as much as we want to. There is still a perception that hospice palliative care is about giving up. And that's a perception we need to change.
On the one hand, we have people who want to die with their, their boots and their lipstick on. And on the other hand, we have people who accuse those of us who work in ICUs and hospitals and in hospice and palliative care of somehow promoting a culture of death because we allow people to die gently, not forcing them to have CPR or feeding tubes or undergo dialysis before they die. And I would submit the only thing that really connects those two very opposite, if you will, poles of passionately held belief is a distrust of the healthcare system and the doctors and nurses who work in it. People are worried about having their lives undervalued or being somehow caught up in a medical industrial complex that isn't attentive to their personal needs.
I am perfectly well with my family doctor with a large, loving family.
I am a 55-year-old retired family doctor with a large, loving family and innumerable friends and former patients whom I see often. I am an extraordinarily lucky man. For the last 5 years, I have also been a patient. I have ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a cruel neurological illness in which a normally functioning intellect becomes trapped in an increasingly weak and eventually paralyzed body. Soon I will die from it. Through my career, I tried to honor my patients' end-of-life wishes. But after a quarter century as a first-hand witness to death, I've developed my own perspective. It's not that I'm a quitter. I have struggled against adversity of one sort or another all my life. And those challenges have helped me prepare for what I face now. I still delight in accomplishing difficult things. And I always wear a bright red ALS wristband that says, "Never give up." That said, there will come a limit. I have made it very clear to my wife, my family, and my doctors that I want no therapy that will prolong my suffering and lengthen the burden on others. I do not want a feeding tube nor a tracheotomy when the time comes that I can no longer eat, drink, or breathe for myself. Physicians and families sometimes feel an obligation to do all that can be done to keep someone alive. I believe this is based in equal measure on a fear of death and on Western medicine's increasing ability to prolong life near its end. I was able to diagnose myself at a fairly early stage of the disease. My case was slower to progress than some, and so I was able to keep working as a physician for nearly 2 years. During that time, I was enormously grateful for my patients, for sunsets, for golf games with good friends. Life has been truly wonderful, even as I have slowly lost the use of my hand, then an arm, then both legs, and my speech. And as much as I have stayed focused on what I am still able to do, it has become harder to ignore the things I'm losing. Today, my guitars sit idle. I haven't used my stethoscope in years. My jogging shoes gather dust in the closet as I watch my belly grow from lack of exercise. I remember the last time I tried to shoot a free throw with a basketball, and I was 5 feet short of the rim. Today, I find myself facing the kind of quality of life issues I discussed innumerable times with my patients. Answers vary from person to person. But the fundamental question is always this: at what point is the quality of life no longer worth the emotional and physical costs of maintaining it? I am not afraid of dying or death. And that is a wonderfully comforting thing for me right now. I have seen so many good deaths in my time as a physician that I know this passage can be peaceful, spiritual, and even comforting to those left behind. I hope for such a death. I have also started to think about how I will know when I am ready for it. To that end, I often think about what I call the 100 things. Here's how it works. Imagine a list of 100 things you do most days. Some are routine, some are chores, some are pleasurable. Get out of bed and walk to the bathroom. Kiss your wife. Answer the phone. Drive your car to work. Go play golf with your friends. Brush your teeth. Write a letter, lick and seal the envelope closed, and put a stamp on it. Hug your child. Of course, we do many more than 100 things each day, but for now, just imagine 100 that are essential to the life you live. Now, if you take away one, you can still do 99. Is life worth living without being able to smell the rose in the garden? Of course it is. How about losing 2 or 7 or 23? Is life still worth living? Of course. But suppose you get to where you've lost, say, 90 things, and now with each thing taken away, a bad thing is added. You can no longer walk well, and you start falling, and it hurts. Your grip is gone, and you also suffer the ignominy of wetting your pants because of bladder spasms. You can't turn over in bed, and that also means you will get bed sores unless someone turns you frequently. Life is still worth living, but you're getting tired. At some point, no matter who you are or how strong, you can lose enough things that matter and acquire enough negatives that the burdens will outweigh the joys of being alive. This is the stage when, as a doctor, I would reassure my patients and their families that they had fought the good fight, and it was now okay to accept moving to the next phase. I know I will one day reach that point. And that's why I worry about feeding tubes and ventilators. It has been my experience that these things are at times started almost automatically. And once they're started, they're next to impossible to stop. I have seen too many unfortunate people kept alive for years in hospitals or nursing homes, beyond all quality of life. Sometimes it causes untold stress in the family. And some of these cases even have made national news, and unbelievably, our government and some national religious leaders even weighed in, as if they have a right to do so. I worry that at some point a feeding tube or other artificial substitute for a basic body function will be medically indicated in my case. Intervention at that time might seem to make sense to those around me, but the result may be that I am kept alive only to count off the remaining things on my list of 100, such that I am forced to live well past where I would want to say, enough. I like to know where a road leads before I set out on a journey. Right now, one path I could take leads to a place I don't want to go. I am determined not to start down that path, even if others think I'm being premature in my decision. In short, I may well be ready to die before my family and friends are ready to say goodbye. But they know that. As I face my diminishing list of the 100 things that make life worth living, the choice of quality over quantity has to be mine to make.
we would hypothesize, because of other research, that the great places are the places where patients are given good choices about what's likely to happen, good information, where they're introduced to physicians or have our own family practitioner who can help them understand what's happening to them with their particular illness and make a choice about exactly what kind of care they're going to want. Some patients will want everything done. We should respect that preference if it's a well-informed preference. Some patients will want aggressive care in the face of an acute illness or in the face of a worsening of a cancer. What we think happens in the places where patients spend much more time in the hospital and the ICU is that patients are not being adequately informed, that we're not doing a good job of helping patients understand that maybe they're nearing the end of life and they want to think about and take control of how their last weeks or months are spent. I think the conversation has to take place at a couple of different levels. I think it's very important to have these conversations at the community level. And it's important for individuals to have that conversation with their physician. People feel differently about end-of-life care, about whether it's okay to forego life-sustaining treatment or to give up on hydration and nutrition. People feel differently about that. And we need to respect those different preferences, because I believe that when we line up care with what patients really want, we'll get much better care. And because what we see in American medicine is the presumption that more care is better and that it's going to lead to longer life expectancy. We get more care, we just don't get better care.
You know, I embarked on my education about these issues 5.5, 6 years ago. And I'm now persuaded that I am indeed going to die. And every year, unknowingly, I pass the anniversary of my death. Who knows what day it will be? But I go by it unknowingly every year. It's just waiting for me. It's not a day that's probably going to matter very much to me in terms of the date. But my kids will know it. That'll be a significant date for them, for as long as they're alive after I'm gone. Who knows what it is? Maybe it's today. May 7th. Who knows? Hope if it is, it's a lot of May 7th away from now, because I sure love this life. When the time comes, it's not going to be easy. I've watched enough people go through the process now. It's hard to leave everything. Your work and your family and your home and your community and this earth and all the unknowns. Nobody really knows where we come from. Nobody really knows where we go. Don't know is a big part of what happens at the end of life. We're going to the big don't know. So one of the things we have to give up too is our certainty. Maybe more people don't go to hospice because it's easier to resist looking at the don't know. Especially with so much noise and clutter and distraction. Oh, what you need is another surgery. I'm in charge here, and I say you need chemo. In my experience, radiation is the right answer for your thing. You know, we have this new medicine. Maybe you need to try shark's venom. We're doing stem cell stuff now. You know, a little gene therapy to take care of it. And you just hear all this stuff. It's like, okay, if you can make the don't know 5 years away instead of 5 months away, okay. I'm terrified. You're the expert. I'm only going to do this once. You've seen it a lot of times. Help me do it well. Human nature, in other words. And there's no cure for human nature. Nor should there be, for the most part. And yet, now, we do see it coming. A guy who was a former next-door neighbor of mine is about 4 months past a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So what's he got?
4 months more, 6. He doesn't have a year, right? For pancreatic, he doesn't have a year. Now that we know that, a little bit of the don't know is gone away. Brad knows. So even though I fully accept that I'm going to go, I'd love it if I had a little time to plan. I don't need years, but I think a little time would be great. There'll be fences that I'll want to mend because I'm human. I make mistakes like anybody. There'll be people I want to connect with. There'll be conversations I want to have with my sons. So then you do have something to give you energy and to make you think about the don't knows and how you want to get from here to there. And hospice absolutely makes that possible and facilitates it and helps it and considers that stuff every bit as important as the medical stuff that you get at the end of life. And they do the medical stuff terrifically well too. Certainly way, way better than the options. So maybe it's about like the more we can get to a place of saying, I'm going to die. And it's going to happen sometime in the next 6 months or 4 months or a year. How can I make the most of it? What can I do to make it the best? There's a guy I interviewed, one of the last people I interviewed when I was working on this book. And he didn't make it into the book, but he made it into a magazine piece I wrote later. He worked at a school it was kind of a reform school, I guess, really, now I think about it. It was for bad boys. And I said, oh, what was your job there? And he said, well, I was custodian and I was bus driver and I was enforcer. He married, he had one daughter, she lived in Florida. And when I saw him, he had leukemia and he had chemotherapy and it wasn't working. So when I interviewed him, he was having a platelet infusion. They had stopped the chemo. He was just getting platelets to keep his blood strong for as long as it was going to last. And they said to him, we're probably not going to make it for Christmas. And his daughter was going to come up with the grandkids for Christmas. And he said, maybe you better come for Thanksgiving. And it was about first week in November when I interviewed him. And I said, how does that feel? He said, well, they're coming. They're coming. And I said, do you think it'll be sad? And he said, these kids are 6 and 8 years old. You know what the hug of a 6-year-old is like? And if it's the last one you're going to have in your life, it's just going to be the best possible feeling imaginable. Here's this guy who's as tough as a 10-penny nail. He's sitting in his bed hugging an imaginary 6-year-old to his chest. And why is that happening? Because a hospice volunteer facilitated somebody who got some money together for a plane ticket to get those kids out. And, I wished I could have been there for that moment, but I could sure imagine. If he knows he's not going to be around at Christmas and he gets his arms around that 6-year-old, never going to let her go. Well, there's life. Life is just a 6-year-old girl we don't want to let go, And if hospice can get us one more hug, what's better than that?
I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, you can add them in the chat box now, and we'll try to answer them about conversation and ways to have conversation. We also want to remind you that you can get the forms to make sure your wishes are honored. You do not have to have an attorney to complete these forms. They can be completed just by completing the document and having it witnessed or notarized, either or. And all those instructions are with the documents either on the state website or endoflifecaretn.org. And Coalition would love to have you join us, send us questions that you might have, or just to get more information to become part of this organization.